monthly meet. While we're waiting for others to join in, I would encourage you all to go to menti.com and type the code 681904. There's a question out there. If you can just type in your response there. So while we're waiting, I would encourage all of you to go to menti.com and type the code 681904. There's a question for you there. You could type in multiple responses. And I do see some responses already coming in. Keep the responses coming. Okay, I see great. This is a very positive feeling on a Thursday evening, and I know most of you are off tomorrow. Bangalore is off tomorrow. People who are joining in would request you to go to menti.com and type this code and just mention how are you feeling today. Excited? Okay, great. Productive? Okay. We have about 200 plus people on call, waiting for a couple of more people to join in before we get started. Till then, keep the responses coming in. And feeling great, exhausted, okay, after the week. Curious. We'll just give it last 30 seconds before we get started. So I see a lot of positive feelings, great, good, happy, excited, energetic, curious, challenged, relaxed. This is amazing. So last 15 seconds for all of you to submit your responses. Okay, so while people are filling in responses, and I do see 240 plus people who have joined in, and some people are still joining in, let's get started. So I'm Nikita Doshi. I'm part of the executive committee of NHRD Bangalore chapter, and also drive some interventions for the national chapter. Work at Publicis Sapient in the learning team. I'm also joined by Avinash, by Mercy, by Pallavi, and by Roger, all from the NHRD team, who would be supporting during the session. And I, on behalf of all of us at NHRD Bangalore chapter, welcome you all to this very, very interesting session, Psychology of Teams. But before we get started, want to talk a little bit about NHRD. As you all know, NHRD is a non-profit organization, and the objective is to promote development amongst HR professionals. And the core purpose of NHRD is to drive functional brilliance and thought leadership, and at the same time be future oriented and set the standards of the profession by inspiring members and also by inspiring other people in the fraternity. and hence shaping future CHROs and HR leaders. We have about 12,500 members across 30 chapters in India. I personally have been a member since 2014 and urge all of you to sign up for the NHRD membership. Um, Something about the membership, as you all know, the lifetime membership has been reintroduced. You can go to our website to just look at what are the various plans available and sign up for that. It's a great forum to be associated with, because you get access to networks, you get access to leaders, also helps you augment your own learning, and gives free entry to a number of programs, and also discounts for a number of certification programs. So these are some, these are just some details, and you could see that on our NHRD Bangalore website as well. Towards the end, we'll also share the QR code, which you could just scan and become a member on the spot. Before we proceed, just wanted to also give you a sneak peek into some of our offerings for the month of May, and some of you have been inquiring that. So as part of NHRD Bangalore chapter, we have a number of power-packed learning sessions, and they have been led by our NHRD team. We have a session on design thinking by Pawan Soni, power of facilitation by International Association of Facilitators, storytelling by Amin Haq, and we have the next monthly meet on the 28th of May, which will be a virtual CLO panel discussion, which will be CLOs across industries. And then there are many more exciting sessions, that are planned for the subsequent months. We've also introduced a design thinking certification program, and this will be virtual, completely virtual for 5 Saturdays, and absolutely price, it's a discounted price that we're offering. So if you're interested, you could reach out to Lakshmi or Arun Kumar, or you could register on the details, on our website. So this is just to give you a sneak peek of all the things, all the programs and the certifications that are being planned for the next few months. We also are on the various social media platforms, and would encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and other platforms. Would also encourage all of you to tweet and about the session during the session, and tag us with hashtag NHRDBLR, and also share it in your network, some of the key learnings from this session. So before I introduce our speakers, and before I said, the tone for the session, I think this is a topic which a lot of us have been talking about, which is the value of a high-performing team. And it has been recognized for a very long time. And no matter how brilliant a person is, or no matter how brilliant the person's strategy is, if a person is playing a solo game, a person always loses out to a team. And hence the business case for building a high-performing team or a dream team is very, very strong. And hence we thought it's a good idea to bring to you a session which actually answers some of these questions, which also gives you some perspectives between what's the difference between a team of all-stars and an all-star team. And hence this session will focus on the hard, the soft, and the deep aspects of building high-performing teams, and also answer some of your questions. We have two brilliant speakers with us today, and how the format of the session would be: we would have the first 30 minutes, and this would be a talk by Dr. Pradnya Parashar, followed by a very interesting fireside chat for about 20-25 minutes between Dr. Pradnya Parashar and Christopher Anand. And the last 20-25 minutes, we'll open it up for Q&A. I would request all of you to post your questions on the Q&A window, and Roger and I would be moderating the questions, and we'll take it up towards the end. I would now want to introduce our two speakers. Dr. Pradnya Parashar is the founder and CEO of Three Fish Consulting, and is an organizational psychologist who has been thinking about and also coaching leadership teams to get better at working together. She has about 20+ years of experience in talent assessment, leadership development, and executive coaching. She has authored the book Secret Life of Organizations. And I've known Pradnya and have worked with Pradnya for about last couple of years. Uh, our second speaker, who would be in a fireside chat with Dr. Pradnya Parashar, is Christopher Anand, who heads campus hiring at Mindtree. He's been with Mindtree for about 6 years now, an Accelerate alumnus, and has about 18 years of experience, who started his career with companies like Aditya Birla Minax, 24/7, and a number of other companies. He loves the interplay of branding, psychology, HR, and operations required to hire and onboard thousands of people. Outside of work, his interests are in practicing mindfulness and minimalism, which he took on actively since 2017. He's also a self-taught graphologist and reads handwriting and understands personality types. And also, this has a deep connection to our topic today. So I would now like to welcome Dr. Pradnya Parashar and Christopher Anand for taking us, over the next 60 minutes for this exciting session. So I'll just stop sharing my screen now, and Pradnya, over to you.
Super. Thank you so much. A webcam closed by organizer. Share my webcam. I'm going to keep the webcam on so people can also see. I'm going to minimize it at my level. So give me 1 second, folks, as I just organize my screen. Nikki, wonderful. Thank you so much for the introduction. And before I start anything, it's a privilege to be here. And so I absolutely want to thank the Executive Committee of the NHRD Bangalore chapter for giving me the opportunity to talk about a topic that's been really close to my heart pretty much over my last 20 years or 2 decades of career, but especially in the last few years as I've been working with leadership teams and looking at what makes it what makes it to high performing organizations and what kind of gets in the way. I like how Nikki put it that, is it an all-stars team or is it a team that is, it's the whole, everybody is a star, or is it just a team that's made of various stars? And I think that's a critical aspect to really keep in one's mind. As I talk about the teams today, I'm really talking about building a team that comes together and is high performing, irrespective of a little bit who's on the team. And talking about memberships at NHRD, and I think I've been a member for the last 20 plus years, and I've had the fortune of working with people like Raja, S. Varadarajan, Bimal Rath, Pankaj Bansal, in my early days working with the NHRD and Delhi chapter. And of course, as I like to say, that's a place where I've got my lifelong friends, also mentors like GP Rao. And I found a lot of benefit in being part of the NHRD. And in a small way, if I can give back to the organization, then I absolutely will continue to always be there. So beginning with teams, the truth is teams are the most natural unit of work. What we mean by that is as we moved from into a post-industrial, knowledge work, especially economies, gone is the model of a very mechanized sort of, model of work where there is one individual working solitarily with a piece of machine or tools. Most of the work today, it's very difficult to think of any work that can be done only by one individual. People are always working in groups together and coming together in teams to accomplish organizational as well as team goals. So given that it's such a natural unit of work, how can we begin to think about teams, and how can we begin to leverage the magic that happens in teams to be able to drive high performance both at the team level as well as the organizational level? But before we go there, as a good psychologist, good scientist, I always like to say, let me operationalize the concept of teams, because we'll all have our own concept of what is a team. But when I'm going to be talking today about teams, I'm going to be thinking about teams using these 5 criterion. So who's a team or what is a team? A team is more than 3 people, not a dyad, but 3 or more people who are dependent on each other, who are working towards a common goal, a common purpose, who share a common leadership. So it could be a leadership towards a project, towards a purpose, towards a mission, but it is a shared leadership that they have for the mission of the team. And the last criterion is really for us, a team is a team whose success and failure are completely dependent on each other. So they share success and they share failures. Now, of course, teams had sort of gone out of flavor, had always been existing in research, but not so much a focus in organizations. Till Google, this was, I think, 2016 or so, New York Times Magazine, which is the Saturday supplement, published an article about the research that Google had done on looking at effective teams or what makes teams effective. Some of you may remember that, Google had codenamed this project Project Aristotle. Some of you may remember that before this, there was research that Google had done called Project Oxygen, which had talked about what makes an effective manager. Recognizing that most of the work is getting done in these natural units called teams, Google brought that same degree of research and focus to begin to look at what are the characteristics, what makes effective teams. So let's begin to deconstruct it in a way to therefore do a feed forward to say, how can we get more and more teams to be even more effective? There were two things from this research that stayed with me. The first piece, or a big piece of what they talked about, is a concept called psychological safety. And this is a concept, and this is some work that many of you would be familiar with. It's work carried out by a professor from Harvard Business School called Dr. Amy Edmondson. And so psychological safety was an important aspect, that do teams feel safe enough to raise some of the difficult topics. And I'm going to talk about psychological safety later in my talk today. The other part of this research that has always stayed with me is the fact that they said, in fact, who's on the team mattered far less than how the teams work together. This actually was a bit mind shifting for me, because up until then, a lot of our, at least I would say my thinking was influenced a lot even by books like Jim Collins, if you remember, who had talked about, let's first decide who's on the bus. So let's first get the people on the team that we wish to work with. Also, a lot of concepts and a lot of work around hiring and constituting teams and teams framework. So when I looked at this research and I said, and that was a moment of aha for me to say, yeah, actually, in a way, the team that we have is the team that we should be working with. And so the research was pretty conclusive, at least in terms of Project Aristotle, that who on the team mattered far less than how the team worked together. And so my talk today really is going to be about, for all of us as HR professionals and some of your leaders of your own teams and business leaders, beginning to think about this framework around how teams work together. So what I want you to walk away today from this talk, and a little bit from the fireside chat that Chris and I are going to have, is perhaps an expanded framework to think about teams. So this is not a talk so much, it's not about a go do this or here's what you can do kind of a talk, but it's more about expanding our thinking, because I think people are creative enough to then bring this framework into their work and create solutions that will uniquely serve their own audiences. So the three things I'm going to talk about is, I'm going to begin first by talking about this whole difference between teams and work groups. And this goes back even further. It's about almost 20-year-old research by John Katzenbach, who talks about work groups as being very logical and sort of natural places to work, but then also what is the importance of teams and what's the unlock that happens when high-performing teams come together and begin to be high-performing. What Katzenbach's work does call out also is that you don't always have to be a team. You can use the word euphemistically, saying we are a team, but sometimes it's good to recognize that we are really a work group that needs to work together as a work group. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that, perhaps refreshing for many of you some of this work, which you may have read and maybe even sort of filed away because of other new stuff that has come to. I'm then going to talk about the hard, soft, and deep aspects of teams, right? This is a framework that has been developed by a dear friend and psychologist from New Zealand, Dave Winsborough. And I find his model and his framework very appealing, and we are beginning to embrace that as we work with teams. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. And as I said, finally, I'm going to talk about psychological safety, which was also one of the key outcomes of research in Project Aristotle. So coming to Katzenbach's work on work groups and teams, What Katzenbach and his team really got people to think about is, fundamentally they said you need to think about what's the work you want to deliver, and given the work that you are going to have to deliver, does it require people to come together as teams? Which is there shared leadership? Is there interdependency? Is there, um, is there a common purpose that all of them are working together? In which case, it absolutely makes sense to begin to come together as teams, because building teams takes time and effort. Or is it a piece of work which actually just comes together at the leader level? And basically, that's a hub and spoke model where leader is the orchestra conductor who's in fact coordinating the work, or maybe perhaps aggregating, not even coordinating, maybe aggregating the work from very disparate people who have limited interdependence. They clearly have a need to perhaps communicate with each other, but it's more a matter of giving and asking either for information or sources. In which case, actually, Katzenbach says, you know what, being a work group might be the most effective model for you to work with. And why is that? And that's because their research showed this chart that I've put on the screen for everyone to see, which is when they looked at performance of teams or performance of work groups, what you will notice is the performance impact of working groups is at the same level as the performance impact of potential teams. What do we mean by potential teams? Potential teams are teams that are working in an interdependent manner. They're beginning to recognize their interdependence. They're acknowledging their common purpose, and they're beginning to put effort and energy into the soft aspect of teaming, right? They work through the hard aspect and are beginning to look at the soft aspect of how do we collaborate. But if you look at it, working groups have about the same level of performance impact as potential teams. So the work that is being done can be easily coordinated, or by definition or by nature is the kind of work that just needs to be aggregated or coordinated by a work leader, perhaps the work or the team leader. Perhaps that's the best model for them. But where do teams begin to matter? Teams begin to matter where the purpose or the goal is far beyond what any one individual can achieve, and far beyond sort of the sums of the aggregate of the pieces coming together. In which case, it really makes sense for that leader of that work group to start shifting and moving his work group towards potential team and maybe even real team. As you'll notice on this chart, and again, this is Katzenbach's research, there is something called pseudo team, which actually degrades performance. So what do they mean by pseudo teams? Pseudo teams are actually teams where, in fact, there is a common purpose and the team is going to benefit from working in an interdependent manner. But it's a team that just hasn't recognized that opportunity. They've neither recognized it, nor are they putting effort into doing it. And that is the danger zone, because where there is a need for people to work interdependently, but they're not recognizing it, it in fact degrades performance, even in comparison to working group. And so potential teams, as I said, are teams that have moved from pseudo team to really saying, yes, there is a common purpose, there is interdependence. They're beginning to put some effort into the soft aspect of teams. And from there, as they begin to work through the softer aspect, perhaps maybe even bringing in the deeper aspects, is when they begin to move to real teams. And real teams are teams that have absolutely recognized the interdependence, are beginning to work in a shared manner. They begin to look a lot like that definition of teams that I put together. And of course, beyond that is the incremental opportunity of high performing teams. And high performing teams are essentially teams who are not just focused on delivering to the purpose, but are actually focused on delivering each other's success, and are also focused on delivering each other's growth. So if you think about it, the bar for what is called high performance is high, because not only are they delivering on the shared goal, they're actually committed to each other's success. The bar is high, but so is the incremental gain, because that's the point at which tremendous potential gets unlocked at both organizational as well as team level. But before I go any further and preach for everything to be only at high performance teams, again, I'm going to call call back people and say, listen, if it makes sense to be a work group, stay there. But wherever there is incremental opportunity, it's worth spending your time and energy on thinking about some of the stuff that I'm going to talk to you right now. We thought there were going to be about 300 odd people in the webinar, and we thought it might be a good idea to get a sense of where do people think most teams are. So Avinash had set up a poll for us. If we can get that activated, Avinash, and people just go ahead and click. Where do you think most teams are in your organization? And forget the question of what is the impact. That's what I want you to reflect on. Are they work groups? Are they pseudo teams? Are they potential teams? Are they real teams? Click one option, please. And let's see what happens. And Avinash, once sufficient number of people have responded, you will close the poll and give us the results, right?
Sure, ma'am.
And remember, work groups are a very valid way of organizing work. And in fact, for most people, that's really where work gets done. We call them teams, but they tend to be work groups. So let's see what this audience, shows us. All right, what do we have, Avinash? What do the poll results look like? Okay, that's great. So there's almost 50% of the group saying basically that they are potential teams or real teams. And yes, 38% are work groups. And yes, and I think maybe that's also because in a way it defines the shift towards potential and real teams is perhaps really reflecting where world of work has moved, right? The 12% who are pseudo teams, I appreciate the honesty because really that's both an opportunity, but it's also a danger zone that you might want to go back and look at your organization. Either move them to being effective work groups or see how you can begin to move them into potential teams. Right? Great. So shall I continue then with this? Avinash, you can hear me, right? Because I got a message saying I'm off air.
No, ma'am. Please continue. I can see your screen.
And you can hear me as well, right?
Right, ma'am.
Okay, great, super. All right, so therefore, if the moving and the movement is towards being real teams and also potential teams, then how do we begin to unlock the performance potential of potential teams and pseudo teams? And this is where the framework that I'm going to introduce to you is the framework of hard aspects, soft aspects, and deep aspects of teams. So what's the hard aspect of teams? Hard aspect is the structure of the team, the competencies of people on the team, the roles that each person on the team needs to have, and also ensuring that there's complete clarity. Hard aspect is also the team purpose, the team mission, why the team has come together. So working with the hard aspect absolutely is important. Is there clarity of role, structure, mission, purpose, and also has the team been staffed right? So do people on the team have the competencies to do the job that they're expected to do? Soft aspects of the team are the aspects where a lot of our effort pretty much gets focused on, right? It's the work that we do when we take team offsites. It's the work that we do when we create morale building events for teams. And I think there is a place for all of that. I would not say that there isn't a place for it, because what it enables, or what those sessions, those workshops, working with the teams allows teams to work on is build trust, build communication channels, learn to sort of work through issues, begin to have some of those tough conversation, and therefore begin to lay the groundwork for collaboration. Also begin to create perspectives of fairness, of equity. How are they interacting? Are they being respectful of each other? And so most of our efforts on team development, once we move past the hard aspect, do tend to move to the soft aspects. And there is a place for it. And folks, I don't want you to ignore that or think it's less important. It is very important and will continue to be. some of the research in that team, and especially I want to talk to you about the research that came from University of Washington by a graduate student there called Will Phelps. And some of you may be familiar with this research called the bad apples. Now, Will Phelps was a student. He wasn't really studying teams. It just so happened that his wife used to work at a place and she would come back very depressed and not very happy with the work. And then suddenly, for a period of time, he began to notice that she was coming in and she was very happy and peppy. So as he looked back and he began to ask her what's different, what surfaced was the fact that there was one person on the team where his wife was working who was especially negative, probably very toxic, but he had gone on a long leave. For some personal reasons. And when that person moved away, in fact, the entire dynamics of the team changed. So even one bad apple, folks, can sour that soft aspects of a team, right? And then Will Phelps, of course, went on to then study it in the lab to see whether that's really happening. And what he would do was he created these teams where he would assign them work to do. But what he would do is he would have an accomplice. He would have a stooge who would be part of these teams. And the stooge would play three kinds of roles. Or three types of bad apples. Either they were slackers, which is just people who didn't want to do the work. Then you had pessimists who were just generally negative. We can't do this work. It's too difficult. We are not skilled for this. We don't have the resources. It's never going to happen. No one's ever done it. Those are your pessimists. And then you had some outright jerks, as you call them, which is people who are just really, I'm telling you, I know what needs to be done. You listen to me. And invariably, what he found in his research was teams which had these stooges, the team performance really declined. And where the teams were just teams that were random teams that were constituted, but there were people who were committed to the task, their performance was always and consistently much higher. And then something interesting happened. As one of the teams that Will was studying had a stooge, and despite that, the performance did not decline. So in fact, they performed at the same level as the control group team, which didn't have this bad apple. As he went on to look at it, to see what's happening, what he found was that there was one person in that team who, despite this individual on the team being a pessimist and being sort of, demonstrating sort of that jerk behaviors, remained optimistic, showed empathy, kept engaging the team members. So while there is power of one bad apple to sour the soup, as you would say, there is equally power of one individual who will operate from empathy, remain engaged, who can turn the tide around. Interestingly, and some of you can go ahead and read this research. I think it was published in the New York Times only. Will was so curious to say what enabled this person to remain in that mode. And he found that this individual, who was really a student at University of Washington, was raised by a father who was a career diplomat. So he had been raised by a person who was always dealing with diplomacy, remaining engaged with people. And that is what he showed in this kind of a scenario. Now, before I move away from the topic of bad apples, I do want to call out that not every person who questions the team leader is a bad apple. They might just be what we call positive deviants. You do need positive deviants from the team because these are the people who are going to stretch the team, push the team, get the team to think beyond the immediate. So don't label every positive deviant as a bad apple. The difference between a bad apple and positive deviant is the positive deviant will still be engaged, will still be enthusiastic, will be optimistic, but is going to be driving the team to a higher end. Whereas the bad apples are the people who are either slacking off or just, being very pessimistic. So now I'm going to talk to you about the deep aspects of teams, right? And which is all about team roles, team derailers, and team values. And since I work a lot with the Hogan assessment tools, you could actually use any tools, but we use the Hogan assessments. I'm going to also show you a little bit about how we do, how assessment of team values or even assessment of derailing aspects of personality on a team, as well as sort of everyday, day-to-day aspects of personality come into play into these deep aspects. So the framework that we are referring to, or that we use with, that we work with, is people on teams assume one of 5 psychological roles. It doesn't mean that they don't play these other roles, but it's just that they are predisposed to showing 1 or 2 roles. So either they'll play a psychological role of driving results, or a role of driving relationships, or someone is a lot more process focused and will be focused on driving process. There might be some who will drive the innovation, and then you have the pragmatists on the team who are going to keep the team focused on the here and now and say, okay, what do we need to do in this scenario, right? The world is collapsing around us. All right, it's great to be innovative, but what do we need to do tomorrow? How do we need to keep the team focused for the here and now? Those are your pragmatists. And absolutely, personality begins to influence the roles people will play. So people who are fundamentally driven, what we call ambition, which is leader-like behaviors, people who are, have that drive, that desire to sort of achieve and ascend, are going to probably play more the results role. Then individuals who are a lot more concerned about, who are higher on sociability aspect, who are higher on the interpersonal aspect. Those of you who are familiar with the Hogan personality inventory, you'll see I'm using some of those words over here, but essentially it's the big five model of personality. So people who are high on agreeableness, people who are high on extroversion, are likely to play the role of relationships. People who are high on conscientiousness, which is, prudence as we call it, are likely to play the process role. People who are high on openness to experience, which is being high on inquisitive, are likely to be the innovators on the team. And interestingly, people who are lower on that openness to experience aspect are probably going to be the pragmatists on the team. We need all people on the team, and therefore diversity really helps. But diversity also creates the challenge of aligning people. So real quick, again, if we have just a couple of minutes poll, I talked at a high level for you: results, relationship, process, innovation. What role are you likely to play? Just reflect back a little bit on your own personality and pick the one. Maybe you'll play multiple, but pick the one role that you're most likely to play on the team. And let's see, who do we have in the audience?
Rania, as we're waiting for responses, just a quick time check. We have about 5 to 7 minutes.
Yes, I'll take about 7 to 8 minutes. Okay. All right, can we close the poll? Do we get enough people answering? All right. Nice. Interesting. High on relationships, high on innovation, a little bit on results, but look at that gap on pragmatism and process, huh? Again, things to keep in mind. Maybe what is needed right now is innovation and relationships and results. But there will be times when process and pragmatism will be equally important. Great. So these are just things for you to begin to think about. And then finally, on the deeper aspects, also things about how are people likely to respond under stress. And what we know is people tend to either move away from each other under stress, which are your moving away behaviors, or they might move against each other, which has become overly dominating, or people might tend to have more aligning behaviors. Depending on how the team, who are the members of the team and what kind of under stress behaviors they show, you are going to see some fault lines in the team. If everybody is high on moving against, maybe they are always battling with each other. If everybody is higher on moving away, maybe they are not resolving the issues in a timely manner. And if everybody is more about moving towards under stress, perhaps they are over aligning and not necessarily challenging each other, may not even be driving results as much. So when we look at the deep aspects of team, we're looking at the roles, we're looking at the team derailers, and finally, we are also looking at the values. What are the key motivators, key drivers of people on the team? Because these key drivers create some unconscious biases in terms of how team members work with each other, how decisions get made by the team, and also create team enablers as well as barriers to teamwork. So if there's value in connecting, values and helping, that's going to enable teamwork. But if fundamentally people on the team are not necessarily driven by a desire to connect or a desire to help each other, that can then become a barrier to teamwork. So we begin to look at values and key motivators. We also look at behaviors under stress, and then we look at what roles people play. As you can see, of course, therefore, building team takes effort and time. But if you're moving towards high-performing teams, then what you want to do is alignment of the hard, the soft, and the deep. Of course, it's easier said than done. So what we do is we take a deep dive into the DNA, the psychological DNA. But that's also because that's the kind of work we do at Three Fish, right? So we dive into it, we discover the psychology of teams. We then have to zoom back again to the soft aspect and see how people are going to work together. And of course, there is no escaping the hard aspect of teams because you still have to get the hard aspects right. Is there clarity? Is there commonality? Are people clear on their roles? And do they have the skills to do what they need to do, right? So that is the sort of the framework of the hard, the soft, and the deep. I want to spend the next couple of minutes talking about psychological safety. And Amy Edmondson, if anybody has read the book, opens her chapter with this episode of, some of you will recognize it's the Columbia shuttle, which in 2003, I think, disintegrated on re-entry, right? It had had 27 successful missions. It had been running for 22 years. In this 28th mission, while re-entry, it disintegrated and all 7 crew members lost their life. Amy Edmondson uses that as an example to say what can happen when there is no psychological safety. Because apparently a project engineer had noticed something when the shuttle had taken off. A heat-resistant tile had fallen off, but he just didn't feel psychologically safe enough to raise the issues. He did raise it somewhat, but didn't press for the issue. Also, people in NASA never really pursued it because it would have required collaboration with Department of Defense, which again, nobody really wanted to do. So Amy calls out this work and says, psychological safety is very, very important. And as leaders, especially mid-level leaders in our organizations, play a very critical role in creating this psychological safety. And what do we mean by psychological safety? How do we know that it's safe for teams? Simple questions. Do people talk about mistakes? Do people share their problems and not just successes? Is there humor? Is there laughter? Do you have people on the team saying things like, we respect each other. I feel comfortable to confront each other. I don't wear a mask anymore. And there are some things leaders can do. Leaders can remain accessible. They can acknowledge limits that they themselves have. They can display their own vulnerability. In fact, they can invite people to participate in the teamwork. And to the extent that they begin to shape and look at the team challenge as a learning challenge, use very direct language, set boundaries for the team, are some of the leadership behaviors that we can actually inculcate in leaders to help them build psychologically safe teams. And at the team level, in fact, there are some practices that teams, which means all team members need to start to build. Skills around managing the self, which is managing myself, what am I missing, how am I contributing, managing conversations, especially having some of those difficult conversations, those challenging conversations, right? And the third thing that they talk about is also about managing relationships. Am I focused on building and nurturing those relationships, right? And especially, I like that last point, in managing relationships, withstand temporary assault of disagreement. Where you have high-performing team, there's going to be heated debate. There's going to be disagreement. Are we able to have that and also suspend that and say, you know what, it was in the interest of the greater good? That's all becomes very critical. And again, every member in the team needs to start building these skills. So you have work that leaders need to do and work that pretty much everyone on the team needs to do. Right? So of course, VUCA world, we are living in it. My own version of the VUCA world is success in this world, I think, is guaranteed if you have self-aware leaders and if you have high-performing teams. So that's my summary. Teams are a natural unit of work. They are important, they're critical. And yes, you can really work with the hard, soft, and deep aspects of teams to make your teams even higher performing and unlock the potential of teams. Because I think that's where the magic happens. High-performing teams lead to high-performing organizations, right? So that's all, folks. That's all I have in terms of my talk. And over to you, Nikki.
Thank you, Pradnya. I would now like to invite Christopher Anand. We have a very interesting fireside chat planned for the next 20-25 minutes, and then post that we will open it up for Q&A. So do post your questions. Pradnya, if you can stop sharing your screen, and over to you, Chris, for the fireside chat.
Sure. Thank you, Nikita. Roger, everyone at NHRD, the organizing team, fabulous job. And to NHRD for the honor of having me as a co-panelist for today. And also to Dr. Pragnya for the thought leadership keynote. There are some examples that I can now speak to you about in the fireside chat, Pragnya, in terms of what my experiences were. And probably I didn't realize them back then, but now looking at some of the constructs that you were speaking about, I'm sure I'll bring those examples in this fireside chat as well.
Super. In fact, that was exactly my beginning question, Chris. You teed it off to say, in your experience, what have you seen as sort of, the difference between effective teams and ineffective teams? Because your entire career has been working with teams across the organization. If there's anything you want to share.
Sure. So the first thing is that the context is so completely different now. For the vast majority of us, we now operate in a completely virtual environment. I've been sitting at home for the last 40 days, and work has been happening as is. And if I just have to look at how challenging it can get at times, because you're not face to face with your team members. Things get delayed in terms of it, but you still have to find a way to kind of work around that. And at Mindtree, where I work, we have a majority of our people who have been working from home for the last 30, 40 days. And in a town hall earlier today, our CEO also happened to mention that, and this is the first time that we had a virtual town hall, thanks to the situation which we're having right now. And he mentioned that productivity has not dropped. And in fact, in some cases, it's actually gone up. And customers also have appreciated us standing by them during these times. The point I'm trying to make actually is that work from home was probably seen as a distraction or a populist HR benefit, but never really as a way to get ROI and more productivity from people, which is an interesting thing that's starting to develop now as different companies start to reveal, how the work from home is happening for them. And also companies like TCS have already taken the lead. They've made announcements of moving a majority of their workforce into the virtual environment in the years to come. And this is where it really becomes important, I feel. I was listening to your keynote as well. For mid-level managers to be able to manage their teams effectively and using constructs like, the Tuckman model of forming, storming, norming, and performing. And if that's not in place and you get into models like this, there's going to be huge conflict which is going to be there between teams. And there's also nothing that you can do about it because you don't necessarily see it till it's too late. So in your consulting experience, have you seen this transformation playing out in companies? What do they do? Or how long does it take to actually turn around teams? Because it's very important for us to understand in this context, for us to take back to our organizations as well.
Yeah. So two things, Chris. Research is very conclusive that people don't need to be in physical proximity for them to have productive and highly effective teams. Okay? In fact, my entire career, I've always worked in virtual teams. I've worked in global teams, working with people across multiple countries and multiple time zones. So I've always worked very virtually. What does matter is, like you said, are team members aware of some of the team dynamics? And are they committed to teamwork? And do you have a team leader who's beginning to, who's trained or at least has read and is committed to sort of cultivating team productivity? To answer your question, how long does it take? I can't put a timeline necessarily because I think it all depends on how prepared are the team leaders or team members. What in my career, in my HR career, and now last 8-10 years on consulting, I've seen that we don't pay enough attention to it because I think we just assume that people know what it means to work in teams. Some of it is an assumption because we worked in teams in school, we worked in teams in college. Those of you who've done MBAs, you probably worked a lot in teams in MBA programs. So there's an assumption that people know how to work on it. And that doesn't always hold up. And when we move people into managerial ranks, yes, we train them on skills like how to give feedback, how to have difficult conversation, but the team is an entity. And I don't think we spend enough energy educating our managers to begin to think of their team as an entity and think of the team dynamics and what is the role that they can play. And now with the concepts like psychological safety, there's some very simple things that a team manager can do. But remember, it comes to self-awareness and then doing some of these behaviors. So anything we can do to kind of ramp that up from the get-go and make it a part of our development DNA is going to take lesser time. But where that DNA doesn't exist, it's going to take much longer time to really get that productivity gain and for people to come together as teams.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And an interesting poll question which is coming up. I know I've not planned this, but Avinash, if you could type this out and maybe at the end we could ask it. If you look at your own teams for all of the participants who are here today, can you, would you be able to identify what type of personality types your team members exhibit so that you at least have a working sense of how to interact with them or how to get them to align with the larger team goals? So Avinash, if that's something that you and Nikita can work in the back end of making that question ready, we'll just probably have it at the end of the fireside chat as well.
But Chris, before we go into sort of personality, because of course we don't believe in types because personality is so comprehensive and fairly complex, right? And as you just saw, there are all these aspects of different dimensions. There is values, there is derailers, there is day-to-day aspects of personality that come into play. I wanted to go back a little bit to the model that you referred to, right? Forming, storming, norming, performing. How many teams even make the transition? Forget what their personality DNA is, right? Or types. How many people, how many teams even make the transition to sort of norming and performing, or do they pretty much always stay in the forming and storming? And maybe it's a leading question, or maybe hidden in that is my sense that very few teams even make the transition.
Yeah, I mean, if I look back across the last 18 years and all the companies that I worked with and the kinds of teams which have been there, I think it shuttles somewhere between norming and then it falls back into storming. So it again depends on having, like you were earlier talking about those bad apples which come in. So it depends whether the tasks change, whether there are new members who come in, and somewhere I've seen it shuttle between the two, and that's where the importance of actually having a team manager or people in the team who are elevated at least in terms of thinking, in terms of being able to get people back on track and to get the positive side going. And across all of the organizations that I've worked, I've seen that it's like this. Of course, my only example probably of having worked in a team where we were actually performing is across all the teams that I worked in. Of course, between norming and performing. But if I have to look back at the last 40 days as well, I'm from the campus hiring side, and you know how it works. We have to go to campuses or we have to go face to face, and there's so many logistics and people and teams and paper forms and all of those things that we have to do. And the way that my team itself has come together to be able to manage all of this adversity, figure out new things. I think, that psychological safety net that you were speaking about, as long as you give your teams the umbrella to make mistakes and to learn from them and to share it with you, and they know that, they're encouraged to do that, is when all of this innovation and all of this can happen. And that's something that, looking at your talk also, I'm reflecting back and I'm seeing that, while I may not have done it consciously, but with our teams and the structure that we have, and I think we are at the norming stage and the performing stage, we shuttle between that, and we've really come together. I think once we have a mission and a purpose to achieve, I have actually seen that.
Wonderful.
And also, it's a good segue into my next question to you, which is, around psychological safety. And I'm again referring to maybe an example in my own career. And I've had the misfortune, I'm saying that quote unquote, of having a manager who controlled his team by destabilizing the psychological safety net. Work continued, short-term results were there, peers were also jaded. And it was no surprise when the annual company survey happened and the ratings of the team in terms of all these parameters was low. Of course, he left and there was another manager who came in, and he quickly strengthened the psychological safety and reinforced it so much that the spark and the energy kind of flowed back. You could feel it in the team. And while you were speaking, I actually thought of that example as well. So, it's very crucial that companies need to ensure that their leaders across the organization are made aware of, constructs like this so that they can be the drivers of positive performance oriented culture. What do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, those of you who heard maybe Amy Edmondson's TED talk or some of her research, where it began was the counterintuitive data that she got when she was studying healthcare teams, right? The high effect, the teams that were rated as high performing were the ones who had a lot more errors and mistakes. And she said, how can that be? And actually what was at play was that they felt psychologically safe enough to document their mistakes, to talk about the errors. And they became high performing not because they weren't making any mistakes, but they became high performing because they felt safe enough to talk about it and then work their way through that. So absolutely. And that's where I said, leaders, especially leaders in the middle of the organization, play a huge role in creating that psychological safety and making the team challenge a learning challenge versus a challenge of proving I'm perfect all the time. Because no, we are perfect and we are not, right? It's all about working our way through it and learning our way. So I think maybe one of the things you're, like you're saying, unconsciously doing with your own team is saying, listen, we don't know what this environment is. It's an unprecedented challenge. Let's learn our way through it. The moment you frame it as a learning challenge, people begin to feel comfortable to make mistakes, no? And also when the leader shows vulnerability. So that's also equally important. And sometimes I think we haven't acknowledged or rewarded leaders for showing vulnerability. It's also what happens in the larger culture, right? If there's tremendous hero worship, then where is the space for a leader to show the chinks in their armor? So that psychological safety construct goes beyond teams to even organizational culture, right? As the organizational culture have room for error, for risk taking, for mistakes.
Absolutely. And one of the other things which is also coming to mind is, you spoke about, I'm moving slightly away from the topic, but I'll come back to it. You spoke of Google's Project Aristotle, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And Google also picked up a performance model called, I think, OKR, which is Objectives and Key Results, back in '99. And it's hugely successful, and Google keeps kind of talking about it. There are many companies which have picked up and using this model, where the shift is more from how performance is measured. It shifts from the traditional KPI method to more of outcome based framework. And an example that I have actually, Pradnya, is in Mindtree. We experimented with OKRs for the first time last year. Our then CEO defined for the talent acquisition team, quality of hire should be measurable and go up by 15%. We have never done that before. And traditionally, you would think that this is the problem of a talent acquisition team and they have to kind of figure it out. But the way the OKRs were structured and the way it broke down was that it brought in so many other stakeholders into the conversation. So whether you're talking about the sourcing or the candidate experience or panel orientation, calibration, how technology adoption happens and how different departments became responsible. It's not just talent acquisition, right? So marketing was involved on the branding and experience, and they carried milestones. We had our L&D, and our business was responsible for milestones of creating content for training, for the interview panels, calibrating them, measuring them. We had our IT department responsible for milestones to work with TA to implement an AI tool so that the work becomes easier. And of course, the TA team had its own milestones of reducing certain operational aspects, increasing the offer, reducing the offer release time, and increasing communications, all that. Point I'm driving is that when there is a shared vision with multiple departmental dependencies, when there's accountability that is upfront visible, you know, across teams you get a sense of who you are, what you have to do, and drive towards a common mission. So that also I feel has a play in terms of moving organizations toward high performing cultures, if I could say that. And long story short, if I have to talk about the experiment which happened, there was about an 8% increase in the quality of hire across 2 quarters when it was measured. So my question maybe to you is, what is your take on performance measurement models? Should we look at traditional KPI models, OKRs are the way to go, or is there something else also out there which probably could help organizations steer their workforce into high performance cultures?
Yeah, so I have a take on it. Use whatever model of performance, but do put performance measures in place and make them very explicit. Because if you remember, the hard aspect of teams is also teams being very clear about what are they expected to achieve, right? What are they going to be evaluated on? And whatever clarity you can give, it helps align team efforts, exactly as you said, within a team, across teams, wherever teams have to come together. And that's when also they realize that the goal that has been set is not going to be achieved by just one individual. That's when the interdependencies begin to be apparent. That's where they start making that shift to being a potential team, or going across from being just a work group to really becoming a potential team. So you use KPIs, use OKRs, use outcomes, use whatever, but create clear mission, purpose, and clear outcomes, because that plays a role in tracking progress, but also motivating teams, no, at the end of it. Yes, we did it. So whatever model you feel comfortable, just pay some attention to, because that's sort of the beginning of the hard aspect of teams. I know we had the whole interesting conversation. We said we would not go there, but I'm so tempted. The whole stuff on compensation, right? So what we were talking to say, sometimes reward systems can get in the way of team rewards, because our reward systems are so individualistic. And what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way it is get up is that the top 5% gets the recognition, and the remaining 85% actually then is wondering, what did I do wrong, or why am I not there, or things like that. Of course, models like the bell curve or some sort of forced mechanisms to kind of evaluate talent, even though they may be good, has at times kind of tied the hands. And I've been in situations like that as well, where I have performing team members, but we do have some sort of restrictions in terms of who can kind of get promoted. And that's the thing that we're talking about, which I will come to a little later as well, right? Who gets promoted, how much hike happens. And of course, motivations are also financial, in addition to, the self-satisfaction of being a contributor and working towards a larger goal. So yeah, we spoke about it, but maybe that's a question, or that's a subject for a whole other NHRD discussion about rewards and recognitions. So we'll park that, I think, Pradnya, with your permission.
And I don't claim to be an expert in coffin men anyways. Definitely. But yeah, I think that is, that's a whole area that also needs to be sort of looked at, right? How do we reward? And also beyond how to reward, even competencies that are set up. So, for example, your competencies reward the assist, as we call it, or is the competencies and what gets rewarded or recognizes only the individual heroism, to the extent, because anytime you're moving and shifting the culture towards team culture, it becomes very important to recognize contributions, what I call recognize assist, right? At least in a competency manner. Definitely somewhere that would need to get baked into all the reward recognition mechanisms for sure.
Sure, yeah.
Pradnya, do you recommend we take few audience questions and continue then the fireside chat?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Chris, I'm okay. I think
I'm okay. We could maybe take a question or two and then continue.
Yeah, so I think there have been multiple questions. There's a question from Vikas who asked, do you recommend to use a personality assessment before forming teams? Is it recommended?
Can you say the question again? Do you recommend using personality assessment for what?
Before forming teams.
Before forming teams.
So I will give the answer on that, at least my perspective. Remember, I started by saying that the research says it's less important who's on the team, it's more important how the team works together. So I lean on that more and more now in my practice. I say start with whoever you have on the team, constitute your team more based on the job at hand, the task, and do people have the skills? And then do the personality assessment to get the teams to begin to work together, to recognize the deeper aspects of where they are similar and where they are different. That would be sort of my approach to it.
Sure, and if I can pitch in, maybe Pradnya, taking from your presentation as well, I made a note of the cycle, the PSI roles which are there, the results, relationship, process, innovation, and pragmatism. So if those personality tests, of course, first you don't have the luxury of the teams that you inherit or that you join. It's only in those 5% cases where you're forming a completely new team where you maybe have the luxury to kind of look at something like this. But if you do have that luxury and you do have assessment tests which can give an indication, try and get as much diversity in, but also try and get a couple of people who can steer it back if it starts to kind of derail, or if that storming phase kind of starts to kind of go out of hand. You have to have one or two of those folks who can bring it back in and move it up into a norming kind of phase.
Yeah, because you need both results and you need relationships. That's the whole challenge of teams. You need results and you need relationships, and both need to be balanced.
Sure, it's a good question. Yeah.
There's another question by Anuradha who asks, how important is it to balance productivity and morale of a team?
I don't think you can have high productivity without high morale, but Chris, maybe you want to address that.
High productivity again depends on how it's being measured and how it's been recognized and how it's being rewarded, is what I would say. We parked that topic, but imagine a team where you have maybe some superstars and then there are the regulars. If you only go by the conventional KPIs and say that only the hard aspects is what we would look at to recognize people or to motivate people by giving them awards or whatever else, then you've left the rest of the team behind. And I think that starts to then fragment or fracture the relationship that the team may have built. And the trust somewhere, I think, then starts to kind of fragment or fracture, which is really, you'll have to figure out ways of how do you keep everyone else on board.
I think morale is very important. I think it's an input variable, productivity is an output.
There are a couple of questions on the bad apple, Pradnya, that you shared, and questions on how do you manage team members who are bad apples, or how do you deal with negative people who are impacting our work. So a couple of questions, on the same lines.
I think,
shoot them, fire them.
Go ahead. You want to address that, Chris?
No, I was just joking. I said shoot them or fire them. What else do you do with bad apples?
I know, shoot them in the barrel, right? Yeah. No, I'll take a more humanistic approach and answer to that. If you go back to some of the leadership behaviors that encourage psychological safety, right? Some of the things that are there are talking about things like having some direct conversations. I think some direct conversations are required. If you look at the kind of work that all team members need to do, then managing themselves when they are faced by this bad apple in the team, making sure that they're having the right conversations is important. Because remember, while there are bad apples, Will Phelps' study also showed the power of the one person who remained empathetic, who remained engaged, right? And before you shoot that, in the barrel, I think to the extent that the team leader can have direct conversations and or also co-opt other members of the team to really mitigate the negative influence of the bad apple. But I think it is very important to call out the bad apple, at least in your own mind, if not to that individual, and then to call them out separately. Because over time, it erodes value. And just taking them out of the team, within an organization, you're just passing on your problem to somebody else, right? And of course, we all do that. But if you're taking a larger organizational view, then let them be where they are and see if you can handle them. And if they are not going to change with you, maybe give them a few other chances somewhere else. But definitely make them aware of the impact that their behavior is having on the productivity of the team. That I would certainly urge people to do.
Yeah.
I
Would you
think
want
if
to
I can
say?
add to that, Pradnya, in terms of why bad apples are tolerated, maybe they produce results as well, but not in the way that you would like them to carry the team along, right? So it kills the team, but it produces short-term results, and I think that is why some of these bad apples are tolerated and in fact celebrated, much to the detriment of the culture of the organization or the teams.
Yeah, that is true. That is the contradiction there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you want to take a couple of more questions, or would you want to continue the fireside chat for 5 minutes, and then
Okay,
we
if
can
you've
pick up
got
some questions?
a lot of questions on that side, then I had maybe one or two questions left for Pradnya, but yeah, we could play it either way.
Yes, maybe we can go to one or two of your questions. At least the one, you were talking a little bit about high performance in sporting world, maybe, or
Yeah,
it's either one. Both couple of them were quite
sure.
interesting things.
Sure. So visualization is a very powerful psychological technique used by athletes. All the top athletes, you would have read stories about how they visualize everything in terms of how they win a match, a goal, or the race, and how they go over all of these things in their mind in detail. And then they just focus towards achieving that. And this is individuals, right? And this is sports psychology. Are there any kind of techniques which are being used maybe by organizations where either at an individual level or at maybe even at a team level, aspects like these are brought in? Because I think I was speaking to my wife, and she's a state level athlete, and I was telling her that I'm going to be doing a talk on performance and about how do you boost performance, and that there's something about visualization that I'm reading. And she said, yeah, I've been using that. My team used to do that. We used to kind of meditate. We used to kind of visualize ourselves in the race, what's going through our minds, how we run, and things like that. So getting aspects like that from the sporting world into the corporate world, do you have some examples maybe of high performance teams or things that corporates have done to kind of bring this flavor into our kind of domains?
Yeah, I think there are huge benefits of doing that, and organizations are beginning to offer some of those things. I was at an event, and there are also companies that are offering it in appified ways, right?
Okay.
And there are employers and leaders who are making it available to their employees. Some of it was, I mean, of course, now with the current crisis, it's become even more imperative, and people are making it available from a wellness being a perspective. But even before that, I think in India, some of these early startups are there, and so some of it is beginning to percolate, and at least the leaders who are themselves meditation practitioners or who use mindfulness are far more aware and are bringing it into their area of work. The one example that I can talk about, which if people have read Satya Nadella's book Hit Refresh, when he took over, became the CEO of Microsoft, he writes in his book how he brought in Michael Gervais, who's a sports psychologist. And Michael Gervais became known because he was hired by the Seattle Seahawks coach to help train his team to become high performing, and they went on to win the Super Bowl in the United States and so on. But if you look him up, Michael Gervais is focused on exactly on the things you're talking about, which is high performance. And he talks to athletes, he talks to people who are at the cutting edge of performance and demonstrating excellence and high performance in their area. And he brings in all of these techniques, because if you think about it, performance at the high level is both mind and matter coming together, right?
Absolutely.
And so physical, spiritual, all of those things coming together. And if anybody gets interested, look him up. He used to have a podcast called Finding Mastery, Michael Gervais. And there's some very, very interesting conversations he's had with people from diverse fields, including the corporate world. But Satya Nadella brought Michael Gervais in to work with his top team That's what he writes about in Hit Refresh. So yeah, there's power when we work with teams, especially with leadership teams, and when we structure some of these experiences and workshops, will invariably get in some of these mindfulness practices, because it is about creating the unlock at the individual, but it's also about creating this energy and synergy between the spirit at the spirit level,
Yeah.
if I were to say that.
Yeah,
And yeah,
when you unlock
visualization.
your own mind, yeah, once you unlock your own mind, then you're at a different level also, right? You start perceiving how other people are. You step back from the regular self that you would be, and you actually are at some level, I think, observing yourself in that situation, which then helps you kind of also react
Yes,
differently or steer
yes.
it differently.
And at a team level, essentially what we're doing is we are expanding that consciousness. Exactly what you said.
Yeah,
Where an individual is learning to observe himself, we then work with leadership teams to observe themselves as a team, as an entity. To sort of
yeah,
step out of that dance, to look at this entity of a team, look at the dynamics, and look at saying, what will it take for us to take this team forward, right? So that same
sure,
observation, same awareness, but doing it at a collective level becomes very important to when you're really doing some deep work with teams to help teams move ahead.
sure,
So yeah.
good.
I think we have
I
10 minutes left, so can
sure.
we take some
Let's,
more questions?
Of course.
Uh,
yeah,
Yes.
please, yeah.
in the meantime, I would also request people to just fill in the feedback. There's a menti.com and there's a code. If you can just fill in the feedback. There's a question by Deepak who says, I think the purpose of the team is also an important aspect on type of team one brings on board. For example, for creative work, we need a very different type of team. For solutions, we need another type of team, and so on. So, what is your opinion on this entire thing?
Oh, absolutely. And that gets for me in the framework of hard aspects of team. You have to look at the task, the team purpose, and then you have to select the team based on skills and competencies. So that's, if you remember, that's what I was saying. I would lean more in favor of hiring people with the right skill set to achieve the task, and then work with them to explore the deeper aspects of who they are, because who they are is how they are leading, but you need the skill set, and so constitute it based on the skill and the task, and then work with the team, whoever they are, to take them into the deeper aspect and work with their personality. So that is how I would look at it.
Sure. There's this question by Rupa Shri, and probably Chris, you could take this up basis your experience. In your view, what is the best way to measure performance of a team?
Okay, now that's a difficult one because it depends on what kind of team, like you mentioned, right? Which domain you're in, what kind of hard skills which are required. But if you have to separate the two and look at maybe the performance indicators with respect to some of the numbers or figures that have to be achieved, that's of course one subset which is there. I spoke a little earlier maybe about the OKRs, which is to look at moving into a from objectives that then get kind of made into key milestones, and to have that as an overarching vision for the particular department. So then what happens is that the milestones, like your KPIs, not the milestone, your KPIs then become a subset of an overall or an overarching framework like an OKR, where you have a sense of purpose of who you are and what you are doing to contribute to the particular team. So while that part of it may not necessarily be quantifiable, I think, but you can still kind of put that down. So the example that I spoke about, how we implemented the OKR for the talent acquisition team, if it was just a measure of saying that every recruiter has to improve 15% quality of hire, how do you even go about doing something like that? You need to have constructs like OKR or something else which can kind of help you with that. Is probably my take on that.
Sure, sure. Thank you. There are a number of questions on just that changing context with respect to COVID and teams, impact of COVID on teams. And a lot of people have asked questions that, when people are not seeing each other, how do we identify disengaged or negative team members? How do we engage them? how do we retain them? So a couple of questions with respect to just the entire COVID, virtual and Teams. Any of you can pick that up.
So maybe I will tell you about what happened with my team, and because I'm doing that on a daily basis now with teams. Of course, Pradnya started by saying that she works with virtual teams, so she will have a flavor on that also. But the way I look at it, there isn't much difference of having moved from the office space into your house space. Just look at it like any other day that you would work from home. It isn't really that quite different, because if you look at the four stages that we spoke about in this, the storming, norming kind of construct, you already probably have done that with your team. So as long as you as a manager or as one of the leads in the team, you have some view of what's happening, you of course can pick it up on the voice, right? So I know when some of my team members are down, so then I will have a side conversation as to what's happening. And then maybe it's something that's happening at home, maybe it's a little more work pressure which is there. So of course you have tools, and organizations which have adopted maybe technology, it's a bit easier, where you have face-to-face conversations like this. So you can of course see if things are going right, or if there's something off balance. You have audio calls which are there, so you can pick up in terms of the tone which is there. And of course, you're not the only one. As long as you build a team which is able to kind of self-direct and self-steer, there's going to be somebody who comes back and says that, hey, listen, I think something's happening here, and then you can intervene. I mean, that's my take. Pradnya, what's yours?
Yeah, so we also had to deal with it in our own team. So even before the lockdown, we took our entire team virtual because we said we can see it. We are in the hotspot of Delhi. Already controls were coming in. So pretty much our team of 8-10 people, we just decided to, we made remote working. So the hard aspect of team, you still have to work through, right? What are the collaboration tools you're going to use? Google Hangout, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, go to webinars, go to meetings. Firms like ours, which are in consulting, we have all collaboration tools, right? And so getting all of that right. So you have to, as Chris was saying, you have to go back and reset some of the norms. What are going to be your norms of engagement? So we created our own norms. We said, we're going to sync in the morning, team huddle, everybody. Then every person in my team would have their own huddles with their sub teams. And as I've been talking to clients in the last couple of weeks, this is very similar to what most of the leaders that I work with or we work with have been doing, right? I think, so one is you set the new norms, and the norms are all around communication. More and more, as I've talked to clients, and this will resonate with more of you, or all of you, communication is the heart of it. Most leaders are going several layers deeper into their organization for comms. So not just their direct report, but there is more of a rhythm of even going one level below, and maybe even going all the way to the front level. For the first time, leadership teams of organizations who were perhaps meeting once a week or once a month are themselves meeting even on a daily basis, because the reality is changing and the entire team needs to come together to work, whether it's the supply chain or the marketing or the sales or finance or HR. So even at very top team levels, I've seen a marked difference in terms of how leaders are behaving, how communication is happening. So that's on the softer aspect. So hard aspect, of course, you need to look at your tools, your norms of engagement. Softer aspect is communication is key. So upping that. I will take a little bit to the deeper aspect because this might interest people. The fact of the matter is, again, our personality will enable us and will derail us. This is the time of tremendous stress, and so all those under stress behaviors of moving away, moving against are going to show up. And so as a team leader or even as team members, be alert to are people moving away too much? Or if people are getting overly aggressive occasionally on a team, know that it's not them, it's the scenario, it's the under stress behavior that's showing up. Show that tolerance, right? Show that empathy. And then from a values perspective also, anyway, people who prefer to work alone, it's going to come easier for them to work remotely. But there are so many people in teams who love to be with people and they're really missing out the interaction. And that's where you have Zoom tea parties and Zoom office, or whichever tool you use, Microsoft Teams happy hours and So yeah, do pay attention to the deeper aspect, folks. You've got some takeaways from today's talk, but look at this. Is it the under stress behavior showing up? What values people have? How can I sort of be a little bit attentive to that in terms of my team members, right? And relationships are going to be the key. So you're going to have to put more energy into nurturing the relationships right now. Wouldn't you say, Chris?
Absolutely. This is where it's going to get tested, and this is where you're going to know the mettle of your own team and what you need to kind of do to kind of bring them back on track. So yeah, there is pressure on all those who are managing teams, and of course those who are supporting those teams as well, to make sure that you succeed in this environment.
Yeah. We are totally out of time, but there are a number of other questions as well. Probably we'll take that up offline. But thank you so much, Pradnya and Chris. It was totally an enriching session. I think covered multiple aspects of teams. The hard aspect, I think we talk a lot about the hard aspects, but the tough part is the soft and the deep aspects, and that makes it tricky. So thank you so much, and Chris, for adding the organizational flavor and sharing your own experiences and examples. I think that added a lot of value. Before we wrap up, I want all of you.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? Can you give, if your webcam is operating and if it is possible, why not get you on the screen too? But I don't know if your camera is working or not. Okay? So no pressure.
Yeah, we'll park it for another day, probably, Pradnya. But thank you. So if I can just request all of you to go to menti.com, and I've mentioned the code there. Just wanted to take a quick feedback. The code is 944537. Some of you have already filled in the feedback. There are 2 questions right now. You'll just see the first question. If you can take about a minute to just respond on the first question about the feedback for today's session. If you go to menti.com, the code is 944537, and I mentioned that on the chat window. If you can just take a minute to respond to that, and I'll move on to the next question after that. In the meantime, I would also encourage all of you to participate in our upcoming programs in May. There are a number of learning programs that have been planned. So do sign up for that, and do follow us on social media. We have around 50 people responded. We'll just give it 30 seconds more before we move on to the next question.
Some of the questions that didn't get answered, folks, please feel free to drop me an email. I'm at Pradnya, Pradnya at 3fish.in. Because yes, there is, we want to be respectful of everyone's time, but if there's a question you have, drop me an email. Happy to respond.
Sure. If most of you have responded, I just would want to go on to the next question, where we would want to hear from you. Just share your thoughts about today's monthly meet. While the previous one was quantitative, if you can just share some of your learnings, or just as how you experienced the session. And while you're doing that, I would like to thank our speakers, Dr. Pradnya Parashar and Christopher Anand, once again. And would like to end with this quote. And we spoke a lot about sports. I think there's a lot of connection between sports and teams. So there was this quote by Michael Jordan, and that resonates very well for me. Talent wins games, but teamwork wins championships. And that's the sense of it. It's not easy, and it takes a lot of time, but I think we did get a lot of tips and tricks with respect to what we should be doing to build high performing teams. So thank you so much, everyone. I would request all of you to share your thoughts about today's monthly meet, and do keep following us on our social media channels. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, organizing team. Thank you so much. Pleasure being here.
Thank you, Nikita. Thanks, organizing team.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.